We know now we're just hours away from the International Day of Peace. That is happening tomorrow, and we want to tie this to our elections right now as we speak. They're coming up in 2022 in August. How can we ensure that the elections are peaceful? Because it is a collective responsibility. Let me introduce my guest one more time. Reverend Dr. Samuel Kobe is here, Chairperson, National Cohesion Integration Commission. Thank you for making time, Chair.
Thank you.
We also have Dr. Mustafa Ali, Secretary General, Global Network of Religions for Children. Thank you for making time.
Thank you, Trevor.
And Millicent Oucho Otieno, Chair of Partnership Subcommittee, Kenya National Committee on Genocide and Atrocity Prevention. Thanks for making time as well.
Thank you.
We'd also like you to keep in your views coming at Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Monday Report. I see a lot of them. We'll read some of them. In fact, let me start off with one of the views that's coming through here from Engineer Lazaro, who says, Wananchi of this nation are generally peaceful and coexist properly. The problem is only coming from the warlord politicians with the intention of using tribe as their shield. Millicent, I'll start with you. Generally, in your observation, right now the political situation, the temperature is already rising as we speak. Are we heading in the right direction or the wrong direction?
Thank you very much, Trevor. I think as a country, we can say for a long time we've been in a limbo. Yeah. As we see things today from the conflict early warning perspective, things are not moving to the right direction. Okay. Because of the rhetorics and the narratives are more divisive. We see also people othering others and identity-based, groupings are coming up more often than not. And I say this because during the BBI conversations and what everybody else was talking about, unity, unity, unity. Yeah. Now we don't see much of that. It's much of, we are poor, you are rich, you are this, you are that. Yeah. And if that rhetoric continues, especially from those who have a clout and have influence, then we are definitely not heading towards the right direction. However, there are voices that are trying to counter that, but their voices are being dimmed by those who are on the warpath, so to say.
Dr. Mustafa, is that your reading as well? The conflict early signs, early warnings is that we're heading in the wrong direction?
Yes, we are, Trevor. Yeah. We are heading in the right, in the wrong direction. If you look at the kind of narratives that are moving around the country, obviously perpetrated by politicians who have no agenda, have no ideology, other than just working on the personality cults that they have been working on for a very long time. It's very much personality driven rather than issue driven, and oftentimes when politics is about the person only and not the issue, we get into trouble. And we've seen that right from 1992, when we've been having, after almost every election except 2002, there have been clashes before or after elections. Yeah. And I think we are heading in that direction.
All right. Reverend, we're all looking up to you as NCIC. I mean, what are you doing to ensure that the elections will be peaceful?
Yes. Well, let me say, Trevor, that I do agree with my fellow panelists here, and say that one of the very worrying trends that we can observe now is that of political intolerance. Yeah. If this continues as a trend, and it's very clear that from, the times that we have seen politicians being either attacked when they visited certain parts of the country, like we have seen most recently, of course, is that of Jimmy Wanjigi in Migori. Yes. Before then, we saw the Right Honorable Raila Odinga himself in Githurai was also confronted, the Deputy President similarly, and Senator Gideon Moi in Nande. Now, this to me is what I'm calling a worrying trend. And it's worrying because it's also ominous, because this is how political violence starts in an electoral process. But what is even more worrying is that historically, this is what has happened even since that's how the Second World War started in Germany.
Yeah.
With the Hitler profiling, identifying Jews as enemies, and then mobilizing, and especially mobilizing the people. Yeah. So that when this becomes a popular, attitude,
yeah,
then that attitude leans to behavior, and that behavior is what leads to now profiling people, hate speech, and hate speech is translated into now actions against others.
Yeah.
And I think this is what is worrying, and that's why I agree the direction we are moving now isn't a very encouraging one, and we must do everything to stop that.
Yeah.
Because unless we stop this trend, it is likely to be accepted more or less as normal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if that happens, we are going back to 2007, 2008, and we don't want to go there.
Yeah.
So that is why, as NCIC, when we came up with the roadmap to what we call elections bila norma, peaceful electoral process, as we go to now 11 months to the elections, and during the elections and after the elections, unless we maintain peace during this period, then we are likely to find ourselves really in a very dangerous situation come 2022 elections.
Yeah, but Millicent, therein lies the silver bullet. I mean, how do we deal with it? How do we stop it before it goes away, it gets out of our hands? Because you're calling it identity-based violence. Which format is it taking, and how do we stop it before it spreads?
Yeah, so the identity-based violence, actually, Reverend has explained and Mustafa talked about it. We look at what is happening in the country today. You know, in the past, it was almost clear that this tribe is targeting another tribe, but it was a semblance of tribal conflict, but in the real sense, there were people who had interests who were perpetrating this kind of atrocities and camouflaging. However, today I feel like we are in a more dangerous zone because the class issues keep coming up.
Yeah.
We are in the pandemic season, and coronavirus has really dented livelihoods, and many people are struggling to even have food on the table.
Yeah.
And so if somebody comes and tells you, you know what, you are poor, he is rich, because he probably has a vehicle, or if those kind of speeches, gain more ground, then we are going to see a scenario that is worse than what we experienced in the last election.
Yeah.
This class conflict and identity-based kind of affinity creation because of identity. I'm from this tribe, I'm from this religion, I'm from this class. We already saw it happening.
Yeah.
And we were very fearful in the last election when we felt that the poor may want to target the rich, or maybe those who are perceived to be rich.
Yeah.
And that's why we are saying that today we must be all taking responsibility, and we must take responsibility from how we behave, what we say, and how we actually take practical actions to alleviate the suffering of those that are around us. And most of the responsibility lies with the duty bearers.
Yeah.
We cannot afford to see the duty bearers continuing with this kind of trend and pitting people against the other by casually talking about things and not considering that you are dealing with a traumatized community, because there's the issues of mental wellness. We've seen it. We hear every day the suicide rate is going up. Why are people killing themselves? Why is there an increase in sexual and gender-based violence? Because people are generally stressed and there's trauma. And this trauma is always compounded when elections come, and then people are traumatized and then sometimes also brutalized in the way that we see sometimes the law enforcement fraternity behaving in a way that also does not manage crowd in a very productive way. And so that's why we wanted to say that as citizens, why should we continue falling into these traps? And are we doing enough civic education? Are the peace builders doing enough to raise awareness for the upstream, midstream, and downstream prevention rather than curative.
Hold that thought on the civic education in just a bit. And Dr. Mustafa, before we went to Fafajiriko, we were talking about the issue of how then do we ensure we have a silver bullet and bring back the rail into its tracks, so to speak, because we know now we're heading in the wrong direction, but we are not there yet, so we can still stop it.
Yeah, we can stop it, and we have the silver bullet. First of all, the work that is already being done by institutions such as the one that Sam Kobia is leading, NCIC, have come up with guidelines and programs to really warn the politicians, the country, that we are headed in the wrong direction. And they have, in this document, Elections Bill and Norma, come up with roadblocks to peaceful election, which include lack of trust, subculture of violence, divisive and selfish politics. Now, the silver bullet here that we have, and we are not using it, Trevor, is the Constitution.
Yeah.
True.
The Kenyan Constitution, Chapter 6 on leadership and integrity, clearly stipulates the kind of a leader that should actually be passed on for election or selected to an office. And if you look at those, just, the guiding principles, selection on the basis of personal integrity, competence and suitability, objectivity and impartiality in decision-making, selfless service based solely on public interest demonstrated by honesty in the execution of public duties, declaration of any personal interest that may conflict with public duties. This is the silver bullet. We have it in our constitution, but we don't use it. We actually are in a country where we elected a fugitive to run Nairobi. And this is, we have our constitution. So we are not following the very document that we actually have. Yeah. What will happen the next time? And because of this kind of politics minus issues, it's personalized, it's about money and who puts out the largest or the loudest abuse out there and is cheered loudest is the one that gets elected into office.
Yeah.
And the media will be there to actually cover that person so that we see that person at 7 p.m. or 9 p.m. news. These are some of the challenges. And so in a democracy, this chapter helps us move towards what we call a guided democracy, because it guides us actually on the people that we must have, those that should be banned should actually never perhaps even be registered as a voter in the first place. And this, if we just go back to our constitution, Trevor, and we follow our constitution to the letter and spirit, that is the silver bullet. Sam Kobia's work will be very easy, actually. By the way, he doesn't sleep these days, and he's not going to be, he sleeps for 4 or 5 hours. He's not going to be sleeping until 3 months after elections in 2022, if we go on in the usual way, business as usual in politicking. I think we have to get serious and have this guided democracy, as guided by our constitution, move forward.
And Reverend, is it time then for introspect? Because yours is a tricky position. I mean, you have including the list of shame, but sometimes the people on that very list of shame are still elected into office. So there are those who argue that the people get the leaders they deserve, but there are those who also argue the NCIC is a toothless dog. Despite having the list, you're not doing anything.
Well, let me say, Trevor, that the silver bullet that Mustafa has talked about as the Constitution, we can take that a step further and say that while we do have Chapter 6 and we have Article 10 on national values and ethos, but unless and until this is internalized, and then we agree as a country who is that Kenyan who should be entrusted with an elective position and a national position. And that is where, and I like what Mustafa said, the Kenyan. You know, we have talked a lot about the Kenya we want. Now, the Kenya we want is very clear in the Constitution, but the Kenyan we want, that's where I think we should focus on now. And that is why when we decided to publish a wall of shame and a wall of fame, the wall of shame is those individuals, most of whom are politicians, who utter the words that clearly denigrate or despise others because they are different, whether it is ethnically, religiously, or otherwise. Now, these kind of people should be the ones that we put on the list of shame, because it's shameful for us to have, individuals elected to such honorable positions. And I think we should even revisit the word honorable. Many of these are not honorable at all. No. That's right. So, Trevor, when I first announced about this wall of shame, even the media said, well, Kenyan politicians don't care whether they are, on the list of shame. And in fact, some of them might even want it because they can use it to mobilize their own ethnic, as Millicent has said. Now, what is interesting is that since we announced that, and we had a number of people we put on that list of shame, in fact, the hate speech has reduced considerably. This is because, and a number of them have come to us when we summoned them and say, please, what I really would like to plead with you is never to put me on a list of shame. And from now on, you will see that I'm not going to go back to hate mongering. So in fact, they do care. And it is good to see that they care. And if we invoke the chapter 6 on leadership and integrity that Mustafa has referred to, then we can begin to see the kind of Kenyans we want to be in the leadership. Secondly, it's very, very important that especially leaders of the political parties should accept that we all agree on the profile of who is desirable as a leader. And this is what we are going to do as NCIC. In the roadmap to elections bill and norma, we have a series of national symposia, and this is meant to have a national platform for dialogue by Kenyans as we move to elections 2022. The first symposium will be of leaders of political parties. We want them to come, and we want them to sign a political decency charter, saying that it is we ourselves in the first place who will bar these kind of political thugs from qualifying even to be considered for election. If we reach that level, Trevor, I think then the country will clearly begin to come back to the right path. Finally, is this the roadblocks to peaceful elections? We have identified 6 of them. Let me just address the first one that Mustafa mentioned, lack of trust. In the social cohesion index that was carried out by NCIC some years back, it was established that the levels of trust between Kenyan communities are very low. The levels of trust of institutions by Kenyans are very low. The levels of trust between the state and the citizen are very low. And it is when you lack trust that you will not believe what IEBC says. It's an institution that you don't trust. And when we don't trust each other, that is why we reject an election. That is why we say, elections have been stolen, etc. And one of the things we wanted to do, therefore, is to see how we can lift this level of trust. That is where we want to begin, and this is part of the program that we have as we move to elections 2022.
Dr. Mustafa, is this a people issue or an institutional issue? Because you see, will even civic education help at all? Because people already know corruption is wrong, but the brazen attitude that corruption is being perpetrated is unfathomable. Even as an MP, when you come in, people will ask you for money, straight up. So is this an institutional issue or is it a people issue?
It's both, Trevor. It's both institutional and people, the Kenyan. As long as Kenyans are going to be asking politicians for handouts so that they vote for them, they will go and steal. A politician will not give you his salary so that you go and vote for them. No, they will have stolen or they will go into that office and steal. And so that Kenyan, and unfortunately, 60–70% of that Kenyan is a youth below 35 years. And this is where we need to speak very directly to the young people in Kenya. Why don't you for once shock these politicians that today are moving around Kenya? Tell them to go home, and they've not changed Kenya. I started voting in 1992 when I was 19 years old. So next year will be my 7th election. Kenya hasn't, it has changed in certain aspects, but in other aspects, it has never changed. In fact, it has become worse, particularly in the way we carry ourselves around elections and politics. Trevor, the other thing is our politics is always on steroids. Money. We have to demonetize our politics and elections and public offices. You know, before I came here, I was comparing an equivalent of an MCA in England. I lived there for about 4 or 5 years, and I interacted with some of those councillors. Today, a councillor in the UK, actually, that is an equivalent of an MCA here in Kenya, earns about 4,130 sterling pounds per year. That translates to about 331 sterling pounds, about 55,000 Kenya shillings per month. And that is a very high office, honorable office in the United Kingdom. In fact, they are the ones who start policies at the grassroots. Our MCS take home every month more than the councillor in the UK take home in an entire year. And if you look at UK's GDP, it's about 12, 13, 14 times higher than Kenya. So if we are going to not demonetize our politics, you'll have all manner of people chasing not leadership and to serve people, but money. And this is something that I hope the Constitution doesn't tell us that we should pay MPs 1 million shillings or MCAs 500,000 shillings. No. In fact, we should be at where Kenya is economically. An MCA should be taking home about 18,000, 19,000 Kenya shillings per month. And so this business of overpaying politicians is something that has got to stop. And we need to make sure that only those people that go there are going to serve people, not going to look and make money through corrupt deals.
Millicent, you had mentioned amplifying the positive voices, but some people may argue that it's a zero-sum game. Even if we as the media decide now only people who are preaching peace are the only ones who will be given the platform, there's social media. They can record themselves, post themselves, go viral on their own. And then now we'll be accused of giving them a blackout because we are partisan. So how then do we amplify the positive voices, and how do we use the youth, who are the majority, to change the narrative?
Actually, first and foremost, the youth are already out there in the social media space, and they are doing a great job. And I think we must commend them for that. And I also think we should demystify this myth that those who really expect the politicians to give them money are the youths. From my experience working with the youth, I think now we even have a class of the older ones who are the kingmakers demanding more money, and the youths really sometimes don't even have the opportunity to reach the politicians. So they are really not the ones who are like demanding for that kind of money. Having said that, however, I think the responsibility lies with each and every individual to do what should be seen to be the right thing. And even as we find better ways of ensuring that their livelihoods, because this is the role of governance, leadership should be providing spaces where people can have meaningful ways of earning a living, and therefore they will not be beggars, you know. So they don't have to necessarily rely on politicians for that. That's the first thing. The second thing, I think we have done a good job as a country in terms of just creating awareness and people also feeling the pride in doing something with their hands and gaining, you know, a living out of it, and also being able to make decisions. We have seen cases, albeit minimal, where people are saying, you know what, we can't put you in office anymore because you are a thief, because you are corrupt. And even cases where people have had, you know, recurrent cycles of conflict and trauma, people have said, no, we want to put this, as the Reverend had said, you know, name and shame, but also memorializations, you know, memories where people can remember and say, when I look at this, that's why at one point there was a demand that can we have something in Kiambaa Church to remind us that this is what happens when you choose to target elections, you know, to target a tribe, because they voted one way or the other.
Yeah.
You know, and I think the more people take personal responsibility, the more they choose to vote. Because, you know, we just talk. How many people don't vote?
Yeah.
And by not voting, you're actually voting for the person you don't want to be in the office. So I guess there are several steps. There are institutions, of course. The trust deficit issue is one that we must also have to address and have to tackle.
All right.
Nonetheless, I believe that if we continue with what we are doing in the small scale and amplifying it, and as you said, it's not only the mainstream media.
Yeah.
I think we are already doing that in the social media spaces. We also need the mainstream media to not only focus on the negativity and the divisive narratives, but also, you know, support what we are doing already in the social media spaces.
Okay. I have to take a quick break here. When you come back, we're still talking about the issue of how to ensure that we have peaceful elections come 2022. And I see a lot of your feedback here. Let me read some of them really quick. Truth Okelo Mwalimu says all concerned bodies like EACC, NCIC must make concerted efforts to avert possible chaos in the next year's polls. NCIC must shed off the toothless body tag. It's time for less talk and more action. Press conferences and halls of shame will not help. Let's see, Engineer Lazaro, we already read that one. Kipleting Manuela says it is very possible to have peaceful elections if the electoral body conducts a transparent, free, fair and credible process. But then who decides, Dr. Mustafa, that it is transparent? We'll come back to that in just a bit. Sharp Shooter, you say media nurtures, promotes the narrative of political divisions instead of countering the concerns politicians are exploring. Steve Mulwa says, I urge every Kenyan to come 2022 general election after voting, just leave the polling station and go home. Peace is very expensive and important. He says he's watching from Kitengela. And then Michael Odiembo says, Trevor hapo umechoma sana. Competition creates division and division doesn't lead to conflict or violence. We must begin to punish those who rig elections, whether it's IBC, and rewarding them with the stay in the office, you embolden them and even reward impunity in the process. Keep your views coming. We'll come back in just a bit.